Greetings, everybody. This is Rob, erstwhile Clan McCrae 9, and welcome to the first in a series of videos for the purpose of demonstrating the new update to Siege of Jerusalem by Avalon Hill, Vassal Module version 2.1. And the following videos will all capture three topics within them. This particular video is going to differ from that a little bit, as it's just going to cover the menu buttons so that you have a good understanding of their purpose and some of the changes that have been put in concerning the menus. So looking up here at the upper left hand corner, the first four buttons are your standard Vassal controls for undo, to undo the last move. Next button, in case you're looking at a Vassal log file of a previous turn. Your server controls, which allow you to go online and play the game against a friend. Your retire button, which allows you to join another side. You can go in as an observer, a Roman, or Judean. And that's pretty much the standard configuration for all Vassal modules, so those first four buttons. The next menu item, however, is the first one that's unique to the Siege of Jerusalem module. It's the gates display. By selecting it, it brings up the gates display. I am aware that I'm missing a couple of gates down here in the temple area. I need to get that updated for the next improvement. The next menu item is the pieces menu, which allows you to grab any pieces or markers for the game. Do be aware, though, that in the 2.1 version of the game, all of the pieces that you need are represented on the scenario boards, and they observe the normal counter limits for the game. So if it's a actual unit or a leader, a ramp, or an armored tower, you should only be pulling them from the scenario boards. On the Judean scenario board, the counter limits are in this area. However, if you need a marker, it's going to be up here in the marker section. So you should be pulling those from the menu window for the pieces. All of the pieces, though, are available, units and everything, if for some reason you accidentally delete one or lose one somehow. Sometimes it happens in Vassal. So just be aware that you're going to be pulling your pieces from the scenario boards for the units anyway. The next menu item are the tables, and these are pretty much unchanged from the original Vassal modules, except for the addition of the gates overlay from the rules, which is the same display that you can receive by pressing the gates overlay button. I have two inventories, one for onboard pieces and one for offboard pieces. So the onboard would show what's currently on the map. The offboard would show what's currently elsewhere, either in the scenario board or in the interface board, which we will discuss later. The victory points display is another new addition to the module. It's a pretty interesting board, actually, because it receives most of the calculations that go on during the game. So you're not going to be adjusting any of these numbers. They're going to be adjusting automatically based on what happens with your dead units and decisions that go on during the game. For instance, how many weeks, how many units you escape. So this module does all of the calculations for your victory points And if you put everybody in the right place, then you shouldn't have any problem getting a visual display of the victory points at any point during the game, and it breaks it down per assault period, as well as the type of victory points that you're receiving. The next button is the turn button, and you can do this a couple of different ways. You can use the turn display, turn counter display here, and you can advance the turn. Notice how it advanced here as well. What I prefer is to use the keyboard, which is Alt-Shift. I do need to warn you that there are a couple of places in the module where it's going to tell you that it's Control-Alt-Up. That is an old control. I've been unable to get that corrected. I've got to get some assistance from the Vassal team, which is part of the reason why I went ahead and posted this without or with some of the errors that are in it, because I need them to have access to the module to get these corrections. So just bear with me and be patient while I get the Vassal team support on how to get those errors out of it. In the meantime, the Vassal module should work just fine though. Okay, next we have the interface board. And the interface board is, of course, where everything happens during the interface period. So I'm going to give you some basic guidelines on what's going on the interface board. If you look at the left half of the board, this area here, you can see that it has each of the individual steps for the interface sequence. And as I'm talking, I'm advancing the turn counter up so I can get us to the interface sequence. So you can see that it's actually a live display. Over on the right hand side, this area here, you're going to want to ignore for right now. It's one of the problem areas that I need help with the Vassal team. I had put up some instructions in here as kind of mock instructions until I get my permanent ones in there. So they're not quite in sequence always with what's going on, at least with the way that the module currently looks. You can read them, shouldn't be any harm in reading them. The intent of the instructions up here are to tell you as the Vassal module player how you are to interpret in Vassal what's going on over here for each interface step. So it's just an assist here, and the instructions that are going to pop up there were the temporary ones that I put in so while I was building it, and I just have to figure out a way to get those replaced with the correct instructions. In each of these blocks down here, you'll see that they follow numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me zoom in a little. You may not be able to see that with the video. Maybe it may not be that clear. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 14, 16F, 17, 24. The reason that only certain numbers are covered there is because over here in the interface instructions, some of the interface steps will be important in terms of automation of the Vassal module. Other steps will be entirely traditional user board movement, just like you were playing the physical board, and don't require the Vassal module to do anything. You require human interaction, basically. So some of the steps are entirely human, some of the steps are entirely automation, and some of the steps are a combination of both. So again, the instructions up here, when they're completed, will tell you exactly what you're supposed to be doing, whether the Vassal module is going to do it for you, whether you as a player are expected to do something, or whether or not you're expected to do part and the module is supposed to do part. The next button is the reserve randomizer, and this is kind of a cool little button. Let me get rid of the pieces menu here. This is kind of a cool little button that assists in determining what the Judean reserve units are. So if you watch me click on it, you'll see that my first reserve unit that I clicked was a zealot. Good for me. A militia, a regular, a militia, a militia, a militia, and so on, another zealot. So the odds are built in based on the die rolls that were instructed by the rules. The next button is the control button, and this is a map that comes up which allows you to change control for the individual parts of the city. You can change them back and forth as necessary. Another turn control specifically for step 16 in the interface. This step controller or turn controller does not affect any of the automation in the game. It's just strictly there as a visual aid when the Roman player gets to step 16. Step 16 is kind of unique because it loops back as many times as the Roman player wants to repeat it. So that's why I added it separately, just so the Roman player could follow the turn steps for that particular step sequence. The next button is clear missile fire. Let me show you how that works. Let me get Roman artillery out here. A couple of pieces. Okay, you can identify whether or not you're shooting a primary, secondary, or tertiary. And the way it shows up is a tiny little number just below the counter when it zooms. There's a 7 and there's a 1. These do not tie into any other automation nor calculation at this point. I'd like to be able to have it do that later on, and it's entirely optional to use as a player. I don't think that if you've been playing it a while it'll be very helpful for you, but if you're a new player you may want to use that to show which units you have assigned to a missile fire, just to see how the numbers are accumulated, and then go to your chart on the missile table to see which column you're going to be using. But the clear missile fire button is just a time saver, so that if you had a whole bunch of these units that had the missile fire set on them, you can just click on clear missile fire and it clears them all back to 0. Okay. Next we have the reserve levels. When you turn the game on, the module on at the beginning, you're going to notice that this overlay is here showing the city level percentages and the number of units that can be drawn out for each reserve level. You just right click on it to reduce the reserve level. And I also added, let me zoom in on that a little bit so you can see it a little better. But I also added a increase button. Not that that's part of the game, because it's not part of the game. You would never increase it, but I just added it in case you accidentally decrease it one too many, so you could correct it. And I put a little note in there on the right click that says increase reserve levels for corrections only. The next button is the KTX marker button. And don't ask me what KTX stands for, because I don't know. It's part of the original design of the game. And I just left it in there because since I don't know what it stands for, I'm not sure if there's any official affiliation with the game or not. So, and KTX marker works as good as anything else, to be honest. But the KTX markers are used for pretty much any purpose you need them to mark hexes for planning or any other part of the game. But sometimes you get a whole bunch of them out there, and it can be kind of a pain to individually remove them. So the KTX button removes them all at the same time. Just be aware that if your opponent has KTX markers out there that they are using, it'll clear your opponents as well. So only use the button if you're really intending for all the KTX markers to disappear at once. And the next button is the mini map, which allows you to quickly go anywhere on the map that you want to. The next button is the hide pieces button, which, as you see, hides the pieces. The next three menu items are the typical zoom buttons: plus, minus, or fit height or width, or set for a specific zoom. The screen capture button, which allows you to take a screen capture as a PNG of the map with the pieces, so it's kind of useful if you want to post those online or have some other purpose for printing out or viewing just the map as a PNG file. The next button is the readout button, and if you'll notice on each of the fortresses there's a tiny little icon that shows which side has control over that readout. You can hide those icons. They're not particularly in the way, so you might want to leave them on during the game, but if they do appear to be in your way, you can just make them hide temporarily. The last button is kind of neat, and I'll go over it more in depth in a later video, but it's the hide reveal Judean artillery. I will show you real quick how that works. Like I said, I'll go more in depth later, but I can put a Judean artillery piece there, set it for my secret artillery deployment, and I will need to go in as the Judean to do this because nobody else can change it, and then hide it. So that's kind of a neat function as well. And then finally, I added movement trails, and the different types of units have different colored trails, just so you know. And then you can remove them by selecting the movement button or the move button. And the final thing I wanted to show you is on the map display itself, where I added this turn information and victory point information. You can see as you advance the turns, it advances through each phase of the sequence of play. And it will also, when you get into the interphase section, it'll also show which interphase sequence you're in at that time as well. And then when you get victory points added in, I could show you real quick. It will actually tally up there. There's your victory points specific to this assault period, and then a few clicks later it adds it to the total victory points. Okay, that's everything I wanted to cover in this first video. Thank you very much, and Video number 2 will be out shortly.